All right, so let's go ahead and get started. This says more rules and concepts you must apply in future argument analysis assignments. And really, I think I should have a colon mark and not a semicolon. Interactive practice. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with this argument. So I encourage you to wait for me to work on an argument or to suggest that you try working on an argument when we get to that argument. I'm going to be coaching you through the lessons, the demonstration, and a practice. The point is to try to come up with a perfect coaching and practice session where you learn in a minds-on, hands-on, just-in-time way. So right now, I would like for you just to follow me. I am going to model for you an ideal way to practice getting good at doing argument analysis. All right. So I know from previous lessons, including the soft talk module I just did, that an argument is a set of statements or a series of statements or a group of statements where at least one, a premise, what we also know as a reason, is given in support of another statement, a conclusion. So if I'm going to analyze this argument, I need to figure out what are the statements in this argument. Where does each one begin and where does each one end? That's going to be my first thing because an argument is comprised of statements. All right, so let me see. I think I'll mark these up with brackets and numbers. I have come to the conclusion that it was those who in fact, actually there's a syntax issue here. I have come to the conclusion that, let's take this out right here, that those who eulogized George Floyd did a good thing. Okay, so this tells me a conclusion is coming, which is cool. And so the core of the statement that they're offering is that really begins right here. Those who eulogized George Floyd did a good thing. This fits the definition of statement given in the argument module. So a declarative sentence that can at least in theory be classified as true or false. It doesn't matter whether or not we agree that the statement is, or the sentence says something actually true or false. It's still a statement by definition. All right, so then what else do we have? My reason for thinking this is true is that, so now they're telling me they're about to give a reason or a premise, and the core of the statement is right here, 2. He was unjustly killed. All right, I have another sentence. So far I have a statement in the first sentence, a statement in the second sentence. What about in the third sentence? Is that a statement? No. I think I'll bracket only statements because technically speaking, properly constructed arguments are comprised only of statements given the very definition of argument. All right, so I just role modeled for you the beginning stages of applying what you learned about in the soft talk module. So one of the rules that I am going to have you record then has to do with argument markup. Okay, so let's write that down. Argument markup. You could write rules as if you'd want to put expectations, argument rules, you could put expectations, requirements, something like that as well. So one rule will be to bracket each statement. That is, you got to isolate each statement in a passage. That's the beginning process. So if I say here's a passage that has an argument, first you want to figure out what are the statements in the entire passage, whether or not they're relevant to the conclusion or just giving contextual information. So you got to remember, if I write it down, you write it down. And you should follow the formatting of my notes because I know where I'm going with this. And I would write very small. Okay, I also want you to number each statement. Okay, just as I've done here. Notice that the number is at the beginning and above the statement that is bracketed. So we also want to note that. The number must go at the beginning of the statement and above the statement. Bracketed. So you can see that the rule or the requirement, the expectation that I have told you to write down is exemplified here. So in working through this document with me, you are going to get to practice bracketing and numbering statements. I encourage you to only do it one at a time so that you can learn from mistakes and get better at it. So just keep that in mind. So you're going to have everything that we talk about in here is going to be exemplified in here, and everything that's in here is somehow an example of what is in here. Okay, so let's go to the next step. What else can I do? So now I'm going to step back into my role modeling. Remember, I'm practicing intellectual courage, I'm practicing intellectual empathy, and I'm manifesting intellectual perseverance. Okay, so now look at the rule. It says statements. Bracket and number each statements. So you might want to give yourself a warning. Don't bracket anything that is not a statement. By the way, it's going to take us the longest amount of time to work through this page because this is where we write down 90% of the rules and lessons. So we will move more fluidly through the arguments. It's just that we're constructing our main set of notes so that this will take us the longest page to work through. So we'll have the most videos for this page. Then there'll be less time spent on the other arguments because we'll already have written down all of our rules and whatnot. Now you might be saying, why didn't you just type up the rules or create a lesson? Because research shows that when you write stuff down by hand, you encode the information better. That's one reason why. Okay, so is this a statement? No. Recall the lesson from the Soft Talk module. Questions are not statements. They're interrogatives. They seek information. They seek to get information about the world or about something. Whereas statements declare, say something is the case, provide information about something. Okay, so we would not bracket this. Now, the next thing, of course, we want to do is we want to say, well, what's the conclusion and what's the premise? So we already have looked at this phrase. I have come to the conclusion that the speaker is being really obvious and transparent about what their conclusion is, the point that they are trying to support. So we would say that one is the conclusion. So write C here. And then we see that they say, my reason for thinking this is true that. So when they say reason, of course, reason is an interchangeable word for premise. And given how reason is being used in this context, they say, my reason for thinking this is true is that. In other words, here comes my premise. So we write a P here. So this brings us to yet another requirement. You will label each premise with a P and each conclusion with a C. Okay, so now we need to take some time out, okay? Put an exclamation mark. Arguments 1 through 10 are simple arguments. I mentioned simple arguments during the week 2 lesson when I was making sure that you guys knew how to construct an argument. Remember that simple arguments have, so you can say meaning, they have only one conclusion. All right, so that said, all of the arguments that we'll be looking at will have only one conclusion. They can have any number of premises. Okay, so I want you to leave all this space here blank. We're going to need it in a future lesson. So leave all of this blank right here. Here, you can write the P will stand for premise, C will stand for conclusion. The premise and conclusion labels should be next to the statement number. As you can see, what we have written here aligns directly with and is consistent with the argument markup here. We have extrapolated from an example. I have demonstrated from my example everything that I want you to know and apply in the future, or at least what I want you to know so far. There will be other things. All right, so there's one final thing there's another thing that I want to learn based on this argument, and that has to do with presenting argument patterns and argument diagrams. All right, so recall that you learned about something called argument pattern in the SoftTalk module focused on argument analysis. There were three kinds: CP, PCP, and PC. What is the pattern of this argument? It is conclusion, premise. Okay, so now we're going to add. So I want you to start on a new line. Trust me, format your notes the way I'm telling you to. It's going to be much easier, plus we have to add stuff later to over here. So turn your notes around or get a new sheet of paper and write, always present the argument pattern. I'm leaving this space blank on purpose. So maybe use just the left, just imagine there's two columns, and right now we're just going to write in the left. Okay, pattern. Okay, see SoftTalk module and arguments 1 through 10 for examples. Okay, remember the pattern when we presented always follows actual ordering in the ordinary version of an argument. When I say ordinary version, notice how I said ordinary argument in paragraph form. In a future lesson, you're going to learn about the concept of an ordinary argument versus something called a clarified argument. Just know that when I'm talking about ordinary argument in this set of instructional videos, that I'm talking about those that are articulated in paragraph form. That's all you need to know for now. We'll learn more about that later. So always follows actual ordering, and I should have said of statements. Use the dash between the P's and C's. So I'm telling you what symbol to use between the P's and C's when presenting the pattern. Do not use arrows. If you need to, if you tend to make mistakes and do weird things, you might want to add never use arrows in argument patterns. So you will see that this coincides explicitly with this. Guys, I'm having you write this all down because I don't want you to forget anything. We have 12 more weeks together. Are you really going to remember all of this plus more that we write down? And even if you remember it, will you remember it accurately, easily, precisely? Okay, so now let's talk about argument diagram. Arg is short for argument. So the module did not talk about argument diagrams. So this is going to get an argument diagram. The argument diagram for this argument would look like this. We're going to start, when we do a diagram, we start with the statement. So we use S to represent, to mean statement, and then number. So you're going to start with the premise in the diagram. At the top of your diagram, you should always have the premise. Then we're going to use the downward arrow to mean in support of. Okay? Oh, sorry, that should not be, let me do that. S2, then you place the label into parentheses. I skipped that part. And then you use the downward arrow to symbolize in support of. And then we know that S2 is being given in support of what? S1, the conclusion. Okay. So let's go ahead and add this. Always present the argument diagram. Make sure that you do not confuse in your mind what I mean by argument pattern and what I mean by argument diagram. Okay, so again, you can see this one, there are no examples in the Soft Talk module. You can add that bit of information if you want to, that there's no examples of this in the Soft Talk module. The only examples are in your week 4, task 1 downloads or examples, arguments 1 through 10. Okay, always start with premises and end with a conclusion. Always. Provide statement. S will stand for statement from now on. Statement numbers first, and then the labels in parentheses next to the statement numbers. Use the downward arrow to show that a statement, hold on, I've got to let that person, sorry, I had to text them that I couldn't get to you right now. Downward arrow to show that a statement or statements are being used to support another. Okay, so you can see that these rules that we have just written down for argument diagrams and presenting them, that this diagram for this particular argument follows these rules. Notice how the very definition for argument is exemplified in a diagram. It says S2, so there's a set of statements, S2 and S1, where at least one, a what? Premise or a reason, and then what does the downward arrow mean? Given in support of. Is given in support of another statement a what? Conclusion. Do you see how the diagram coincides with the definition for argument, but at the same time captures the actual what's going on logically with this argument? Also, notice this. When it comes to the pattern, the C's and P's follow the order of the original ordinary argument. So you have conclusion, then premise. Do not, if you need to, you might want to add that here where I talk about argument pattern if you think you'll forget. Never present the statement numbers with the pattern. You might want to write that down over here just in case you think you make that mistake. Never present the statement numbers with the pattern. So, with the diagram, you don't necessarily follow the order of the statements as they are given in the ordinary argument. Why? You have to go back to your notes, the diagram. Always start with the premises and end with the conclusion. That's what we did here. So you can start with a 2 and then end up with the 1. So even though this statement here comes first in the ordinary argument, when it comes to diagramming where we're trying to visualize the logic, we present S1 last because it's the conclusion. Let's add one more thing and then we'll be done with this video. And like I said, this is the longest video because we're writing down most of the rules that we need to apply using argument 1. But just to emphasize, the downward arrow means, when I say equals, it means. Okay, I'm not saying it's equivalent to, we're not doing math or anything, means given in support, you could say offered in support, attempt to support, given in support of.